And here's today's trivial connection between the two presentations. The Potawatomi's first agent at Council Bluffs was a guy named Edwin James, who was also a member of the Stephen Long expedition. How does that even work? Third up, we will have Troy Stolp, local educator, talking about the Potawatomi and the priest, the story of Father Jean de Smet.
All right, good morning. Leo Tolstoy talked about history not having one causal agent, but always interconnected, dynamic things happening, maybe coming together in a congruence. That certainly happened here in Council Bluffs. And you've seen this map. This is the Potawatomi coming through, certainly. I must have hit the wrong button. Anyhow, as you come along here, you will find that a lot of historical figures came together here. Lots of generals, lots of people locally that we know here. Edwin James was just mentioned. You will see a lot of these figures showing up in my presentation today. The first thing we have here is the, I know you can't read it, but this is the 1830 Indian Relocation Act. This, the first one was actually convincing Congress to the Indian Relocation Act. This is the actual Indian Relocation Act. This first slide here is a nice historical documentation of the trip of the Potawatomi from the Great Lakes region, as Susan talked about. And here you see Henry Atkinson, talking to General William Clark, who was in charge of the whole area at the time. So you can see, returned yesterday from the Potawatomi and Iowa Sox and of the Missouri River, and talking about how they're moving on up to the Council, what will be the Council Bluffs area. Sorry, this is a little bit dark. When I originally copied these, the internet wasn't around yet, so these are straight out of a book. You will be in command, again, sir, you will be in command of the Potawatomi coming up to the river, Captain D.B. Moore. And again, this is by order of Brigadier General Atkinson, who Fort Atkinson was talked about earlier by Jay. This is a response to the order. I love this particular slide. This D.B. Moore, you can't always glean intent from cold documentation like this, but this always seems so sarcastic to me. He was given the order, "I have the honor to inform you that in compliance with your order on July 25th, dated at Fort Leavenworth, that we arrived there on the 4th and erected a blockhouse." This is the very first building that stood in Council Bluffs, in what would become Council Bluffs as far as we know. And it would be located at Pierce Avenue. I don't know if any of you here know where the old Regal Lanes was located, but it was just east of that. Here's some more documentation, of course, about the Potawatomi being there. Again, there's Colonel Kearney. If you can read that, Colonel Kearney, Fort Kearney is named after him. There's Fort Leavenworth, talking to Colonel Leavenworth, who was also stationed at Fort Atkinson. Again, a lot of the bigwigs of American history made their way through here at one point or another. This is a picture of the blockhouse. Now, there is a description of the blockhouse being of about 4 buildings. The first historian of this area was mentioned before. His name was Charles Babbitt. And this is from his book, and he had a lot of arguments about what did the blockhouse look like, when did it come down, that sort of thing. There was a hotel placed where this used to be. So we can't go there and really find any remnants of it other than the stones that Susan showed. But this is probably the most accurate picture. We have this picture, and Charles Babbitt talks about how this probably isn't accurate. He even says supposititious picture right there. All right, you've seen this boulder before in Susan's presentation. This marks the site of the first blockhouse. And the Potawatomi, the reason for the blockhouse was that the Potawatomi had lots of run-ins with the Lakota. And they had complained to the government. There was certainly an Indian sub-agent here. Edwin James, at the time, was the first one, again, as Ryan mentioned. And he's well-known in local history around here. And they pleaded to the government and military, sent out, and they erected the blockhouse with a couple other additional buildings. These children were not at the original blockhouse. You can tell that they're happy to be here, but this is the stone that Susan showed in her picture, commemorating the site of the blockhouse. And that is the location of the blockhouse now. You can kind of see where that apartment complex is. The stone is certainly right there on the end of the block there. Now, one of the meetings, the interdynamics, the meeting places of people with certain different agendas, as Tolstoy talked about, happened here with a father, Jean de Smet. He was born in Termonde, Belgium, and he was a Jesuit missionary. And originally, as he was deciding to whether he would become a Jesuit missionary or not, he went back and forth, probably the first known recorded history of a Belgian waffle. Anyway, he left Belgium in 1821. Oh, there's a picture of him there in the middle. He is the guy that does not have the long hair. And he was a very famous missionary. He was all over the United States. He was the celebrity missionary of his time. And here's a book by John Upton Terrell called Black Robe, based on the life of Pierre Jean de Smet. Okay, in 1821, him and 5 other students, as you can see, got together on a boat in Belgium and went to Fort Lauderdale for their spring break. No, wait, actually, they decided to come here to the United States and become missionaries. And part of the Jesuit mission doctrine, if you will, is that you give up all your attachments. So they certainly couldn't have any money, they certainly couldn't have any possessions with them other than what was utilitarian. And they were to enter areas such as native tribes and proselytize. Their job was to win converts. So they would fall in love with the people that they were trying to convert. Unfortunately, that ended up in destroying old cultures. But you really can't fault Father Jean de Smet for his intent, I guess, because he certainly in his diaries, in his letters, in his journals, he demonstrates a great love for the people that he's with. And he was sent here in 1838 as part of his missionary work, and he was going to found what was known as both the St. Joseph's Mission and the St. Mary's Mission. And I love this. I love this is one of my all-time favorite pieces of documentation. As you can imagine, Father de Smet coming up the Missouri on a steamboat, and it's moving slow. That's one thing you love about this history is Father de Smet does a great job in his journals of showing what life was like, how things worked. It's a window into not only the culture at the time and technology, but the cultures that he encountered. It's an anthropological perspective that we don't often have. But this one, he's riding up the steamboat, moving pretty slow because he's going upriver, and native groups on either side. And he says, they come to salute us in the most affectionate manner. And I can't help but think that he misunderstood those salutes. I'm sure as he was walking by, it was probably equivalent to the middle finger salute. So I always love that particular passage here. Let's see. There we go. All right. Father de Smet left detailed journals and also letters to various people throughout his life. And this is one of those instances when he talks about steamboat travel. And he's talking about how the steamboat all the time would get stuck in the middle of the Missouri. And the boat had to be lifted over the sandbars. Two heavy timbers are set in the water and in the front, and the boat made fast to them. The engine is then started full speed, and by means of posts, it lifts the sterns and shoves the boat forward a yard or two or three. It's done over and over again until they get over the sandbar. Wouldn't you love steamboat travel? This is one of those wonderful things. Father de Smet in his journals constantly talked about traveling. He would talk about how today I traveled 1,000 Flemish leagues. Now, I don't know what a Flemish league is. I've never been able to find a very good definition of Flemish league, but I use that every chance I get when I talk to my students. Anyway, he's talking here about the Devil's Rig and about how he's traveled across the ocean several times, but the Missouri River travel was what he dreaded the most because of the snags, the fear of the steamboat boiler exploding, those sorts of things. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. He talks about arriving among the Potawatomis. Now, Father de Smet was promised that he would be met by all of the Potawatomis, welcoming him with open arms. We love you, we love you, we love you. We've been waiting for you all our lives to show us the true error of our ways. Well, when they got there, he was greeted by a few Potawatomis. There were several hundred Potawatomis there, except he learned later that they were there for the booze that was coming in on the steamboat with him. And that is part of the legacy of the Potawatomi and Father de Smet, is the alcohol that the traders brought up, sanctioned by the government, gallons and gallons of whiskey, rum, and beer. This talks about his daily life. Billy Caldwell, through the military at the time, arranged an agreement because the military was leaving the blockhouse, and Father de Smet wanted a building, and so Billy Caldwell orchestrated the donation of the blockhouse and its buildings to Father de Smet and Father Verret and the Jesuit mission to be the basis for their church there. And here it is talking about, this is another one of the documents I love. While I climbed, I put up a cross on the roof, and while I climbed a ladder to put it in place, and my flag floated from a hole in my breeches, Father Felix beheld the devil clap his tail between his legs and take flight over the big hills. So, and this talks about what he did. His daily life was converting people, baptizing, Potawatomi, marriages, those sorts of things. De Smet describes the Potawatomi as the most beautiful people he ever saw when they were sober. This describes the blockhouse. Again, we have a fine little chapel, 24 feet square, surmounted by a little belfry. And then he talks about how the roof didn't hold out anything. And that was one of the conditions at the mission, was there were holes in the roof. It was in constant disrepair, and they were constantly short of supplies. But there was plenty of alcohol for the Potawatomi, brought in on every steamboat. This is at the same location at the blockhouse. This is on the other side of the block. Father Jean de Smet's marker. Both of these children appear to give me the Native American salute as my steamboat passes by them. Now, this is the problem the Potawatomi had. De Smet does a remarkable job of recording a short period of time. Each of the items you see here listed by date indicates alcohol-fueled violence by the natives against each other. One instance in there, and I won't read them all to you, one instance, a man takes his baby, presumably his baby or somebody else's, and kills it against the wall on the outside post of the blockhouse of the mission buildings. And Smet talks about how the men, women, and children were constantly filled with alcohol. He wrote letters to the government, to people in the East, to his friends, to other Catholic people in power, begging them to help stop the sending of liquor on the steamboats. Native Americans did not ferment beverages. Here's some more. Prior to the arrival of Europeans, and therefore their digestive systems, could not process them very well. All of this brought consternation to Father Smet. He had never seen such violence before. He was really not mentally or emotionally prepared for it. When the delegates from the Flathead tribe in 1839, so Father Smet was there a year, he was eager to try a new field. And he decided, you know what, I'm out of here. I love the Potawatomi, but I'm going to leave. But before he did, this is just talking about the alcohol in the North American plains prior to Europeans, and there was no evidence, little evidence of alcohol prior to that. This is, before he went, Smet made a map. You've seen this map a couple of times. You'll notice that there are a couple of, right about here, that is called Caldwell's Camp. That was right next to the blockhouse. If you're from Council Bluffs or have been here, you can find it over by where the Mormon Tabernacle is now in Blimpies. This is another version of the same map. And this is the last entry of the baptismal mission of the St. Joseph's Mission, 1841, you'll notice. After that, the last mission departed. Smet moved on to the Flathead Mission further upstream. And this is from the Indian sub-agent, no longer Edwin James, and talking about because of chronic drunkenness, it became a problem, and that really with the coming of white settlers, that it was just best to close the Potawatomi portion of the reservation system here. I will, however, point out, that in there is my only discovery of the use of the term nugatory. I've never seen that word before, and it means totally useless, so I guess that this anecdote is nugatory. This is the last treaty of the Potawatomi, 1846, as Susan referenced. This is the whole thing. This, in essence, put a bow on the Potawatomi in the Council Bluffs area. And this is the documentation of the Potawatomi leaving. Removal of the tribe and of the Potawatomis has entirely freed Iowa of her Indian population, and this is in congressional record. So that paves the way for the coming of the Mormons into the Council Bluffs area. And with that, I will leave you with words of Father Smet. Please remember me to the Honorable Dr. James, the true father and friend of the Indian. Father Verrett, Mr. Caldwell, and Mr. Hardy's family send their best love to you. Farewell. And all of those people are well known in local history, in the local Council Bluffs history there. And this is a map of the where Father Smet spent much of his time in addition to the Council Bluffs area. And South Dakota actually named a town after Pierre Jean de Smet. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for being such a lovely audience.
So, anybody have any questions for anyone? You better, because otherwise I'll ask you guys questions. Do you guys have any questions? I'll say this much, I do not like Charles Babbitt. I think he's a horrible historian.
I just have a question. So the alcohol that was coming up on the boats, was that provided by the government or was it just?
The government had to approve all of the, as Susan talked about, everything was approved by the government because it was arranged through the treaties and their annuities. And it was demonstrated throughout history that it was definitely a tool to negotiate with Native Americans.
Jean-Pierre Cabinet actually got kicked out of the Missouri River fur trade actually for bringing up booze for a while.
Yeah, this was a major topic. During the early 1830s, there were attempts by the government agents to reduce the flow of alcohol, and the American Fur Company found ways to circumvent that by distilling their own liquor at Fort Mandan up in North Dakota. So there were efforts made by some individuals to curb the flow, but it did flow rather freely.
And as I pointed out, the demand was certainly there. Smet at one point talked about that it was a war against natives by the traders, and instead of using cannon, he made the metaphor that the alcohol was cannon and the grape shot was whiskey, rum, and beer.
And of course, to tie everything together, as not, 2-3 weeks after the Potawatomi signed the treaty, basically giving up the reservation here, was when the first Mormons showed up. And the Potawatomi had been dealing with the Americans for a very long time, and were not very fond of them, and they were pretty well welcoming to the Mormons arriving. And in fact, the first white man to settle near Chief Wabansi was my great-great-great-grandfather. So there's more trivia for you today. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do any of you have any idea where the Potawatomi village of Miami's over near Lewis, Iowa, were they more with the band that would have been moved to Kansas or Oklahoma?
Can't, well,
I don't know, is this on? I don't know the answer to the question. It's very complex, and you have to almost take a name and work backwards.
it's Lewis. It's what became a Mormon settlement called Indiantown. But yeah, today it's Lewis, Iowa. Yeah, they mostly joined to Kansas. Miami's bunch were really staunch traditionalists. Them were the guys from the North Woods. So, you know, here like around Caldwell's bunch, they spoke English, they spoke French, they dressed like white people. Them guys out at Lewis, they were very native.
I know Chief Bigfoot was associated with the Miami's village. And I know Father Smet made a trip there at least once.
Anybody else? Well then, I guess that's that, and I thank you all for showing up for this. I hope you enjoy the rest of your presentations today. I'm getting increasingly nervous because I have to give the next one. So thank you very much.